Okay, let's carry on with our drafted wheel by adding a bit more structure to it. Now currently, it's a very thin wall structure and it has an open back. Now of course this is a child's toy, so the load's not going to be much, but you can expect that with a child's car, they're going to put a bunch of weight, they're going to lean on it, and this is not a very strong design. So what we'd like to do is add some ribs to the back to give it a little bit more structure. So I'm going to start by selecting the back flat face of the inside hub and starting a new sketch. Now we're going to use a tool that Solidworks has called ribs. And to do this, we're simply going to draw a single line. We're going to snap to the upper edge of this flat face. It's an intersection point at the top. And we're going to drag all the way to the intersection point of the inside of our circle. Now we're going to hit the escape key. Now the reason we do this is because this sketch is below the upper lip. So that means that the end point here is actually inside of the material right now. Because we do have draft, we're actually sitting inside of the wall, and that's perfect for what we want to do. We don't have to worry about having to extend anything. So we can exit the sketch, and the tool we want to use is under Insert, Features, and we're going to select Rib. Now, when we use the rib feature, there are two main options we need to be concerned with, and that's the extrusion direction. Now, currently, it's assuming that we want to extrude this up and down, and this is not the best option for us. We need to change the extrusion direction to be normal to our sketch, and it's going to take this and it's going to extend it out, in this case, in two directions on both sides, and take it all the way down to the base. But we need to adjust our thickness value. We're going to highlight the 0.1 default value, hit the equal key, and link it to our global variable for ribs. Now once we say OK, you can see the preview on the screen changes. We also need to make sure that we add draft. So we're going to turn draft on, and again, we're going to select equal, and we're going to use the global variable for draft. Now this might present a small problem, but we're going to go ahead and work with it, and then we'll come back and make some changes. So let's say OK, and take a look at the results. So we've added a nice rib from the back side. Let's go ahead and view this from the back. And you can see at the top, it has the 60% thickness of our wall that we set up here. So it's 0.018. But as it extends down to the part, it gets wider and wider. Now, if we actually look at a section view of this, let's go ahead and look at a section view from the top and drag this up. As we take a look at this, it gets pretty thick here at the base. And this is actually a thicker section than we want to deal with. Now, if we look at this in a normal 2, now if we were going to draw a sketch here, what you want to avoid is an area where the circle that is equal to your wall thickness, in this case, let's say 0.04, you want to make sure that this circle does not get overlapped by the wall thickness. So you can see in this case, the inscribed circle is going to be much larger than the overall wall thickness. So we have to be real careful here because right now the wall thickness is much too great. So what we want to do is we need to adjust a few values. We can adjust our equation manager and reduce the amount of wall thickness we have. This will create a thinner wall at the top of our peak. The other option that we could do is reduce the draft on this specific feature. So if we go back into the rib feature, or if we simply select it on the screen, we can modify that value. Now you have to be real careful when you're editing a feature that is linked to a global variable. In this case, we have it linked to 3 degrees. To unlink this, I'm going to click on the globe icon, and you see that it says equal draft. Now if I click it again and try to delete this value and change it to 1, what we're actually doing is we're changing the global variable. If instead I click on this and delete it and hit OK, it removes the global variable from it. And now I can use that 1 degree draft. So now what we've done is we've taken that 60% value and we've added a 1 degree draft to it. So when it gets all the way down to the base, it's not necessarily going to be too large, but we should still measure this. So I'm going to use my measure tool. Now I want to measure from one side, go all the way to the other, and see what our wall thickness is. Now you can see here it says it's 0.03. Now if we want to change, in this case, our custom units and change the number of decimal places, we can see that it's actually going to be a little bit different. Now in this case, we're going to have to reduce the wall thickness. So we need to go back into our equation manager, and we need to change our wall thickness to be, let's say, 0.5. Update our part, and that makes the rib just a little bit thinner. And these are the kinds of challenges that you want to be aware of, because as you're creating these parts, you start adding ribs and things like that, you have to be very careful that you're not adding a rib that ends up being too thick. Now there are other ways that we could approach this. We could start the rib a little bit lower. We could change the actual rib profile so that it curves down a bit and comes back up. We don't have to worry about it getting too thick at the base. Now with this rib, you can see that it's planar. It matches the face that we started the sketch on. It doesn't go up to the back edge of our wheel. So this is not really offering a lot of structure to our part. It's offering some because we are taking care of about half of it, but we want to add a little bit more. Now we can do this with either a fillet or a chamfer. We can just take this edge and we can add a small fillet to it, and that fillet will still maintain the draft. In this case, let's go ahead and add an 1/8" fillet, say okay, and take a look at the results. So if again, we view this from the back side, you can see both sides of the fillet faces are still drafted. They still have that 1° draft on them. So this works just fine. Now from our feature tree, I'm going to select rib 1, control select fillet 2, and then go into my linear pattern dropdown and select circular pattern. So you'll notice when we come in here that features and faces is already selected, rib 1 and fillet 2 are selected. I now simply need to go back up to the pattern axis for my parameters, select a round edge, and pattern it. In this case, we're going to use 360 degrees, 6 instances, and equal spacing. Now I will note that if geometry pattern is turned on, you'll often get a warning message because of the way that this feature intersects our part. We simply need to turn geometry pattern off, say okay, and now we have a pattern rib feature in the back of our part. So far we've added a few things, and this is a fairly simple part, but it has all the basic principles that we need in order to create our molded parts. We have draft on the outside and the inside, so we can have a very simple mold, an upper and a lower portion of the mold. Now, if we have to make changes to this, we have several different ways that we can do it. We can modify the features. Anything that's linked to an actual parameter, we can go back and modify our equation manager and modify those global variables so that we have the available options that we need. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and select Save As, and I'm going to call this Drafted Wheel 2. So that way we still have the original before we added the ribs, and now we have a Drafted Wheel 2 option dealing with the changes that we added. And that way you can go back and forth to either one.